Welcome to the Nerds in Christ podcast, where we level up our faith by finding the gospel in our favorite fandoms.
Pride, greed, envy, gluttony, wrath, sloth are the 7 deadly sins that have plagued humanity since the first interaction with the serpent of old. If you are breathing, then you struggle with these very same sins. Let's look at what they... Oh my gosh, I messed it up. We're live. What's up, nerds? I'm Mike, your homeschool theologian. This is Nerds in Christ podcast. We haven't done this in a while, and I'm a little rusty. Who do I have with me?
Bible man Cam.
And
Tyler.
A new guy, Tyler. So Tyler is a very good friend of mine. Used to work at a dealership that his family runs, and we've hit it off and have continued to talk. And he's, he actually is behind the scenes a lot of times and gives me a lot of good notes that I totally steal and don't give him credit for. So now he's here today. So Tyler, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yep. First, I was just going to say thank you to my wife. Without her, I wouldn't be in the places that I've been sent. Awesome. And second, I would like to give a shout out to my friend David, who actually encouraged me. He called me out on it one day whenever we weren't even that close yet. And he called me out and he was like, well, if you can't read today, why don't you listen to it? Mm-hmm. And so ever since then, I've been listening to it and I really just haven't stopped.
Sweet, man.
So,
all right. So our goal is always to challenge you to level up in your faith so that you can go out and make disciples of all fandoms. This is season 2, episode 14, The 7 Deadly Sins. So this icebreaker is kind of going to be showing the skeletons in our closet, but what is the sin that you struggle with most? And I'll go ahead and start. It's honestly, it's funny. I think it's all 7 different times of the day. Like a lot of times it is lust. Like I'm not going to lie about that one. But yeah, it can be pride at times. It can absolutely be greed. It can be lust. Like I said before, I'm just kind of going down them. Envy, a whole lot of times. Gluttony, not so much with food and different things, but just consuming too much. Absolutely. Wrath, actually don't struggle with that one very often, but you can only bust your knuckles so many times that you don't say a certain something that you got to ask Jesus to forgive you for. And sloth, a lot of times it is sloth, believe it or not. So what about you guys?
I would say pride, and I would say that if until we can starve out the pride, we're not really going to be able to help others. Mm-hmm. If we become so prideful and we have our nose up at everybody, then no one's ever going to look at your walk or look at anything that you have going on. They're not going to rely on anything you say. They're not going to even give you the time of day. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. A lot of times pride is like you build up a wall that people can't come to you and relate to you, but humility is absolutely... Yeah. You're selfless. So you're like, you draw people in. That's good.
Yeah. You think of the thing you think with pride though, is if you've ever had a college professor, most of them end up having a God type complex. Mm-hmm. And so whenever they have those complexes, it's like everything they say, no matter what it is the law. Even if there are things that you could argue, with, you can't really argue with. And then you don't give anyone their chance to say their side of the story.
It's good.
I feel like 3 of them are really what I struggle with more daily. And it's something that we all kind of have to accept that we're going to struggle, but there is an outcome that we can overcome it. Definitely lust. I mean, as men, even for women, it's something that's been inherently instilled in us since Genesis, since we fell to the serpent, because we saw that the fruit was good. And then pride, and I feel men in particular really struggle with this just because we can be prideful in a good way, but a lot of times we're prideful in a not so good way. I mean, I take pride in my work. I take pride in knowing that I am a Christian, that I follow Jesus, that I'm married, have a wife, but there's sometimes at work where I get prideful, where it's like I know that I can work harder than anybody else, and so on and so forth. And then envy. It's like I don't necessarily envy on a lustful side, like, oh, I want that man's wife or anything like that. But it's like, man, I work just as hard as him. Why don't I have that car? Why don't I have that much money? Or not have to struggle or worry.
Right.
And it's something too, it really, and hearing what all of us struggle with, it made me think of Paul. You see it in 2 Corinthians. It says, therefore, I will not exalt myself. A thorn in my flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to torment me, so that I would not exalt myself concerning this. I pled with the Lord 3 times that it would leave. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is perfected in weakness. And I think that's something we don't take a lot of time. I know in the lustful side, I've prayed that away a million times. And sometimes it's like, no, I see what Paul's saying. It's there to tempt me in a way that God always provides a way out. He says it in scripture. Mm-hmm. He doesn't tempt us more than, well, he doesn't tempt us, but he doesn't allow a temptation to tempt us more than giving us a way out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when we are weak, we can be made stronger by his perfection.
Right.
Like Jesus said, I didn't come for the healthy, I came for the sick.
Yep.
And when we're acting perfect, are we acting with Jesus? Or are we acting with ourselves?
We're just acting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What mask are you wearing that day?
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's good.
One thing I want to add to that with the thorn in the side, I mean, if you really think about it, I think it's supposed to be unknown. But here's my question. What do you think it is? Because whatever you think it is or the audience thinks it is, that's probably the thing that you need to focus in on. And I think that's why it's written that way.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there's all kinds of scholarly debates. Oh, it was pride, it was lust, all this stuff. But I think it's true. Like that, it is worded the way it's worded so that we can import what our thorn is and learn from it.
Relate. Yeah.
Correct.
For sure. For sure. So 7 deadly sins. What is sin?
A disconnect from God.
There you go. There you go. It's choosing something other than God, basically. Right. So what does sin do with our relationship with God? What you just said, it disconnects us. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, I imagine it as we're holding God's hand, and when we sin, we're letting go and we're reaching for that. We're reaching for whatever the temptation is. Mm-hmm. But like you were saying earlier with temptation, I feel like you need to, when you're tempted like that, you need to lean on God, like literally, physically, spiritually, whatever you got to do, lean on him. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why he allows temptations to come, so we can lean on him.
Well, you look at like the story of Peter walking out to Jesus.
Yeah.
Like from the boat. He was fine when he had his eyes on him. Mm-hmm. When he started looking left and right and seeing the storm and the waves, that's when he fell in. And that's kind of what sin is for us.
For sure. Yeah.
It's when we take our eyes off of the holiness that God has put in us, in the sense of, like we've talked about before, he will give us the desires of our heart, not the desire of a bigger house and fancy Lamborghini, stuff like that. But it's like, hey, I want you to go and make disciples. I want you to lead your wife, your children to Christ. Have them go and continue to plant for generations.
Yeah. Yep. That our desires line up with his.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm. So I came across this the other day, and I really, really liked it, how so many times the 10 Commandments are described as like laws, like God says, do not do this, and how that's how I've always been taught that. And it's a very often how I viewed it. But as I've grown and matured in faith, I've realized it's really kind of these guardrails that God put up, like, hey, stay in this lane. Don't go either way, because he wrote them in love. Like the more and more you get into Christianity and growing in faith, you realize, no, God is love. He love. It's not that he's trying to get you to do one thing or the other. It's that he loves you, so he doesn't want you to do something. And in the Hebrew word for these, it's not laws. Like we see them and we read them as the 10 Commandments, the 10 laws. They're the 10 statements, the 10 words. It's actually, the better translation would be 10 words. So in Hebrew, there's no word for obey, which is very, very strange. It's just listen, because they don't disconnect listening with obeying. It's the same thing to them. So when you hear God say something, you do it. We're trying to teach my daughter that right now. It's not
very
working.
Cool.
It's 6 years old, but learning in the Shema, in Deuteronomy, what is it? 4 through 5, something like that. The Shema is, hear, O Israel, listen, obey. A lot of times it's translated as obey, but Shema means listen, obey. It's that same word. So I wanted to say that to say, like if it's not so much following the law, following what you have to do. It's God loves you so much, and he's like, hey, if you don't do these things, you're going to live a good life. Like, just all you got to do really, and Jesus summed them up, is love God, love people.
Yeah.
And that's it. So let's see what else we got. I think that's it.
So if Jonah would have just listened,
Yeah, right.
he wouldn't have gotten swallowed
He did
up.
not shema. He
Right.
did not
Right.
listen, right?
And you look at that throughout all the Old Testament. David, it says
Mhm.
when the time when kings went out to war,
Yep.
David stayed at home
Yeah.
and he took a walk. And that's when he saw Bathsheba
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
And
so many of that, the way it lines up is like when kings were off to war, check one. He was on the rooftop at night. There's another check. Like, because that's
Yep.
when in that culture, it's known that women would bathe.
Mhm.
It's just
Mhm.
known. So he was like, he got on his computer late at night and he just started surfing. It's like, David, get back inside.
And that's what we need to take away from the Old Testament. The Old
Yeah.
Testament, a lot of people, especially in today's day and age, are like, why do we listen to that? Like
Mhm.
the old laws of like what is it, 600 and something there are?
613.
It's like a lot of those are necessarily negated when Jesus comes around because he fulfills the law. But it's like, what can we learn from them?
Yeah.
It's still a good instruction.
Humans are still the same.
Mhm.
We're still human.
Well, that's
So-
why the Bible says nothing new has come under the sun. There is no new temptation that hasn't been presented before.
Yeah.
It's just in a different form.
Yeah.
I mean, instead of iPads, MacBooks, and laptops, they had brothels. They had like look show, stuff like that. So if you needed your fix for lust, you could get it.
Mhm.
If you wanted to be prideful, I mean, you look at big companies, they're very prideful of like, oh, we have the best. Or like, oh, we're this big company. Why aren't we making billions of dollars? And that little company is.
Yeah.
And we need to see that in order to attack that.
Yeah. Ooh, that's good. That's good. Okay. So 7 deadly sins. Why do we pick that with Nerds in Christ? Like, where does that fit in? So really it fits in because at least one, if not more, of the 7 deadly sins, at least one of them is in every story, every fandom, maybe more, sometimes all of them.
Well, you look at, what is it, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, or just the original, an anime,
I knew there was an anime called 7 deadly
well,
sins.
there's that, but in Full Metal Alchemist, they also wrestle and fight the actual 7 deadly sins. Like there's representation
Cool.
of pride, envy, lust,
Very cool.
gluttony.
I feel like there's one like that for Final Fantasy too.
I think so.
I could be wrong. We're going to look that up. All right. So we're going to go into level 1, pride. And for pride, I wrote down the beast, like from Beauty and the Beast. And he's cursed because he is prideful. And I couldn't think of many others to go with that. But I just thought of the beast, how he's cursed for that, and how he has to find someone to love him to break the curse, even though he's a evil, nasty, scary monster. And I wrote down Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. You can't get any better than that.
No.
I wrote about Darth Sidious. So
Mhm.
one of the things that
Yeah,
I'm
Star
gonna send
Wars.
you something.
Star Wars is like has all 7
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, it's like Sidious always kept his lightsaber in his room whenever he was Palpatine, but he'd keep him there, but he wouldn't use it, and he prided himself on not using it. And whenever you look at the way he was attacking Luke, he kept on and on trying to torture him
Mhm.
without using
With
his
the lightning?
lightsaber to finish him,
Yeah.
which was ultimately his demise because then Vader picked him up.
Yeah, because I'd imagine like a lot of video games, like he was using a lot of his energy.
Yeah,
And by the time he was, almost done with Luke,
Right.
he didn't have much left. And Vader's like, I'm just going to pick you up, dude.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I wrote about Absalom too. So Absalom, King David's son,
Mhm.
whenever he was off at war, he didn't shave his head. And custom was, from what I've gathered, that a lot of the times they would shave their hair before war, and his hair was really heavy, and it ended up being his demise because that's how he got caught up in the branches.
I've never heard of
Yeah.
that. Yeah, he was riding through some low branches and
Yeah.
got caught.
And
then
it talks about how heavy his hair actually was
Yeah.
at some point.
They probably did that if blood got on their hair or something.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense.
Or to grab them if you're in close combat range.
I've always said that with people that grapple and fight. It's like, if you have long hair, I'm grabbing it or your beard first.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you look at it too, us as nerds, we can be very prideful in what we know.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I mean, you look at...
I've gotten a lot of arguments over on the internet. Not arguments, but like stuff we've posted back in, like kind of when we first started. So many people were like, actually the Mandalorians do take their helmet off. And it's like, okay, I was just trying to make a point.
Yeah. But it's like something, especially gamer-wise. Yeah. Like I'm prideful sometimes where I know I can go through like Skyrim or Fallout and not use certain weapons that help you do it. Or like in Call of Duty, I know there's some times where it's like, hey, if we're in...
I can go through Ocarina of Time with 3 hearts.
Yeah.
Only 3.
Or like multiplayer, like when I joined on your brother, he was playing with his wife.
Yeah.
And I joined and I was like, I'm going to kind of show how good I am. And I ran around with a knife. And it's
really?
And I had the most skills on that server. And it's like...
In the most holy way, right? You were praying for people?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very Knights Templar-esque.
Yeah.
But we can't. But it's something... too, where I know a lot of people, especially in this realm, that their pride is in that. They don't care about anything else about how much, unless it's about how much Star Wars knowledge I know, about how many signatures. I could care less about my wife, my kids, but I can tell you in Star Trek how many people William Shatner slaughtered or something along those lines.
I think it has to do with identity. Like that, like a lot of times fandoms become their idol, their god, their identity, and they pride themselves on that. When, this is a good segue to how we should take, it's kind of a counterintuitive, but we should pride ourselves on humility. And I wrote down, because the beast, I wrote down Belle, because she was super, super humble in that whole story. You had all the different guys pining over her, Gaston and everyone, the whole village just loves her and goes after her. And even when she goes to find her dad, she is humble enough to say, no, take me, let my dad go and I'll stay. And the beast is like, okay. And I wrote down, where's it at? Philippians 2:3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourself. So always, always, always choose others above yourself. And I think Jesus is a great example of this.
Well, I look at I was watching a YouTube short yesterday or today, and it was Russell Brand, who's a big name star, who's a recent convert, and it's like diving head first. And he was talking about how he never understood the first will become last and last will become first. And then he put it this way, and it's so true. And I think it's a true teaching that we have to realize, where he's like, what finally clicked is, he said it was Russell Brand, and he said the people who couldn't do for Russell Brand. And when I realized that I need to put the people who could do absolutely nothing for me before me, it made so much sense. It was just that we like, in our day in society, especially with connections, the internet, all this stuff, we have a tendency to like, oh, I'm going to make friends with X, Y, and Z because in the future, that connection might get me here, there, or somewhere else. Where it's like, hey, let's make connections because we're just people and we want to show Christ, not so much, hey, what can this person do for me in the long run? And when we get out of that mindset and start going, hey, I could care less what these people could do for me, I just want to show them Jesus. That's when we really start to overcome that pride.
Yeah.
Because when we stop caring about what we can do later on and more like, how can we be humble and help these people?
Yeah.
That's when that switch is flipped and it's like, okay, now we can start conquering that.
Yeah. It's good, man. It's good.
I have one more too. King Asa of Judah, he ended up dying from a foot disease because he sought the help from his physicians instead of seeking help from God. But if you go over a chapter or two before, this is in 2 Chronicles around 16. If you go back before that, then he called upon the Lord whenever there was it says an army of, I think 1 million is what it says, but it says in other translations, it says cannot be numbered, So anyways, I just found that interesting. He sat here and he conquered different battles, but then he ended up dying from a foot disease because he sought human help.
Yeah.
And he wasn't, he was leaning on his own understanding instead of calling out like he did whenever there was a literal war going on.
It's almost like he knew there was no humanly way possible to conquer this battle. So he asked God. Right. But with a foot, it's like, well, it's just a foot.
Right.
So I see it as like with pride, a lot of times we know we can't do anything. So we ask for help, but so often I think pride is like in the subtle things of like every day, not being selfless and letting someone in when they're at a stoplight, you know what I mean? On traffic or like getting mad because someone's driving slow and you go around. I don't know why I'm using a car analogy so much, but it's like just the simple everyday pride is, I think, really what kills people. What killed Asa, you said?
Yeah.
Well, and that's so true. I mean, you look at where we've been all in this past couple seasons, and it's like we can rely on God for the like miraculous, but when it comes to like, hey, what am I supposed to do for a career or something like that? It's like, oh, we got this. And it's so true. It's for the big things, it's easy not to be prideful. It's the small things that get us.
Yeah, for sure. We were talking about that on the car over here of the stewardship. Stewardship has been in my brain. You know this. That's all I keep talking about. But God is teaching me so much. If you obviously you like maybe a future you have, like you're saying, a big stuff like a career change or like going to school or something like that, something you're working towards. You see it off in the future. But what God's really worried about is, what are you stewarding with your two hands right now in your season? And a lot of times we can be bad stewards with what we have right now because we're so focused and worried about what's in the future. When he's more worried about, okay, I'm trying to build your character right now with a little bit. So what little thing, I read the talents this morning in Matthew 24, I think. But the talent he had the one, the dude with the 5 talents, the dude with the 2, they had something. But the dude with the 1 talent, yes, that's a lot of money, but he thought, it's nothing. I'm just going to bury it. It's like, no, even if you have one little small thing, like the widow's mite, like you've got to steward that well and invest it well for the future, because that's what's going to build your character up for the future.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I mean, I've used this analogy. It's not the best analogy to use, but as far as like you sit here and you're like, let me be a millionaire, God, or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, you're going to be bankrupt 3 times and you're going to be a millionaire on your deathbed. I mean, like we sit here and we think it's this cookie cutter thing when we don't see all the obstacles that we're going through. If we can slow down and pray about it and even ask him why and just see that he's doing something there, we can be more, I guess more reliant on him, and we'll get peace about it. Instead of just sitting here and acting like the sky is falling the whole time.
Yeah, that's good. All right, level 2, greed. Of course, I wrote down Thorin. He's a silly dwarf. Mainly because I listened to The Hobbit not too long ago, the whole thing, and just, if you've never, the movies, I don't count. I don't think they're great. I think the Lord of the Rings movies are amazing, perfect. There's nothing wrong with those. The Hobbit movies, I just don't like. They're goofy. Anyway, so read the book or listen to it. But I wrote down Ecclesiastes 5:10. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. So in the story of the Hobbit, you have Thorin Oakenshield, who is down on his luck. The dragon conquered their homeland, scattered his people, killed most of his people, and he's the heir to this throne, right? So he does pretty good throughout the the book. I said movie, and I talked about how I didn't like the movie. Anyway, he does good through the story of being a good leader, all this sort of stuff. But finally, when he gets back to the Lonely Mountain, gets the gold, the dragon's defeated, he turns into a total evil. Yeah, you can say tool. Just he literally. I've heard it said before. Like he himself turns into a dragon, where he just hoards this gold, and that is where I think the movie did really well, where it portrayed him. I think they call it dragon sickness in the movie. Yeah. That's not in the book, but that's so true in the story. Is he sees all of that as, oh, that's mine, that's all mine, and it just totally eats him alive. And I think that's why he, spoiler, dies in the end. It's because he hoards all that gold. Now, this dragon has been pillaging and just terrorizing people for generations. So all that gold is from all over the land. It's not just from the Lonely Mountain. And at the end of the story, he's on his deathbed and he says this to Bilbo: if more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. And I think that can be very, very, very true to our world today.
And you look at the time where Tolkien's actually writing that.
Yeah.
It's so true. It's a post-war era, and everything's starting to come back, and the countries that ended up coming good through the war were booming. And, I mean, you have... It's what led from, historically, in America, of course, we were just coming out of the Great Depression from the 20s after World War II. Of course, this is 20 years later, but you look at World War II really helped kickstart that because industry took off and everybody could have the American dream. And that happened all over the world in the sense that, hey, after this, I can go get a good job, make good money, have 2.5 kids, a 3-bedroom house, 2 cars. And it's...
What do you do with a half kid, though?
It's a dwarf.
Anyway, it's a dwarf.
Well, we're canceled. Anyway, but it's so true. But with you talking about that, it really made me think of Matthew 6, where it says, no one can serve 2 masters. Either one, he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And I think in today's world, that's so hard because us as men, we're taught we have to provide for our family and to devote all our time to work and to the hustle as opposed to the wife and children and that connection. And it's sad. I mean, that's something I'm leery of when I go back to school. Not that that's the ultimate goal, but it's like, am I going to like that to the point where I start pushing myself back in front instead of letting Christ continue to be front?
Yeah.
And we have to really steward that. And I think a good representation of that, and people don't really much talk about anymore, is tithing. When you truly give your first 10% to the church, to a ministry, to something to do that is solely focused on Christ and expanding the kingdom, and you're like, Lord, I don't care if it's my last $50, I'm going to give that, because that's, give that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might not have that $50 that you needed, but it'll work out.
Yeah.
And it's so countercultural because we're taught, I mean, with YouTube. I mean, YouTube is like, hey, this is how you become a millionaire. And that's our exact opposite goal. It's like, if it happens, it happens. You're never going to know it from us because we're not going to have it. But it's that very fine line of when you seek money more than Christ, you're going to get in a bind. You are going to go bankrupt 3 times. And then by the time you do hit that money goal that you realize you wanted, you're going to find emptiness. And it's funny, you see a lot of people that are extremely wealthy. And I know a couple of them. And it's like they found more happiness with their connections that God has given them and what they can do with their money for ministry than they ever did with the money they had for themselves.
Given a purpose. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a dragon sleeping on a pile of gold. It's like, what's the point?
Right.
And I think I wanted to touch on the providing for the family, because that's something I studied a lot when I first became a dad. And not that I am at all like leveled up in a way. I'm maybe level 2 in that, but you know, providing for your family is very biblical, like you said. But what do they really need? Like we get in the American culture of like providing. We got to have a new house, new car, this, that, and toys galore. And it's like, no, we really just need a little bit of food and
a roof overhead.
And it's, you know, you can make that working at Walmart. Like you don't have to, the more that you work out of the house, the less you're there. That's what's robbing them of something. Not, you know, you're not providing them with, everybody has Apple Watches or whatever. But, and two, like you said, like provide spiritually and mentally, physically. Like you've got to provide there too, I think, first and foremost. But anyway, I wanted to touch on that because that burns in me.
Have you guys seen the American Dream Casting Crowns video?
I don't think so.
It's an older one, but I mean, look it up.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, because it'll hit home. It's like the guy's sitting there slaving his life away, and he's trying to provide all these things for his family, and then ends up missing all the games, ends up missing all these things.
I think I have seen that music video.
And another thing with tithing, I've actually got a story on that. My brother-in-law did a sermon a while back on it, and he was talking about tithing and how that week they had to tithe. He's like, I don't care what we missed last month or we missed this month. So right now we're going to tithe no matter what. And he was like, things were really tight. And then after they tithed, they got a check in the mail from the insurance company for, close to the same amount. So, I mean, it's just like,
it's the only time God says, test me.
Right. Yeah.
And not that we should test it, but when you tithe, like you said, first, that's what you got to do. You've got to get in the habit, and it's a heart posture of, sitting down, and a lot of us do our bills on the computer, probably, right? Before you pay any bill, get in there and tithe somehow. Even if you, I remember what my parents used to do, they would write a check and put it aside. But right now, like when I put my paycheck in at the bank, right? And then I go home usually, and I did it today, so I need to go home today and do it. But before that, anything else comes out of that, I tithe first and foremost. And it's always a heart posture.
And I got 2 stories on that. I mean, Mike, you and I have been best friends for a few years now. And it's but when my daughter was first born, you know how I was working my one job, and I had a great side hustle with a buddy making good money. And I got to talk to you one day, and I came to the realization the first 8 months of my daughter's life, I don't remember her being that small, because I'd get off work at 5 and I'd be home at 9 or 10 after doing some AC type stuff, making really good cash money. And I this year and last year has been one of those things where I took a step back, and it's like, man, that was fun. I could get whatever we wanted, but man, I don't like, my wife will show me pictures, and it's like, I don't remember her being that small. Like, I don't remember that time.
Yeah.
And then with the tithing, with my wife going back to school and doing her internship and it just being one income, that's something I have ever since it happened. That's something I've strived. I'm like, Lord, during this time, I'm not going to test it. I'm going to just give it. Like, and it's so cool because it's true. As soon as I deposit my check, I'll open, of course, our church has the app and everything. I'll immediately like, hey, what's 10%? And it's like, okay, I'm going to give a little more if I can. Boom. And then I'll move the money to our bill account and our grocery account and all this stuff. And it's like, it's just been not smooth sailing, but it's so true. Like, statistically speaking, there's no way we should have made it this far with how everything's worked out.
Yeah.
But it's been more abundant than it ever has.
Yeah. Cause it changes your heart posture.
And it's not that we're doing it to like, hey, I'm going to give to receive.
No.
Right.
It's like, no, Lord, you're like my bracelet says, you take care of the sparrows, you'll take good care of me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was trying to say. Like, it changes your heart postures to that. I'm going to give because I know you take care of me. And I know that even though I will have 10% less, I'll have 100% more. Put that on a sticker.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's the thing that we do have to be careful with is we can get ahead of ourselves, and it's like, oh, this month I'm going to give $500 and the Lord will double that or triple that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you're putting your wrong heart posture. It's the same reason Ananias and his wife died in Acts.
Yeah.
Yep.
If they would have came and said, hey, here's just a part of what we have.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, oh, this is everything we got out of the sale. Here it is.
Yeah.
No, like, be honest. Like, hey, I'm struggling. I want to keep a little more, but Lord, no, I'm going to give it to you. And if you take care of me, you take care of me. If you don't, I'm still going to give it to you.
Yeah, I think Jesus, I believe, says, don't let your left hand know what your right is doing. Don't know where.
Matthew 6.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
The very first one.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Cool. We ready for generosity, charity? Yeah?
Yep.
So I wrote down Bilbo to kind of counteract Thorin, right? But I wrote down Bilbo, not so much because he was in The Hobbit too, but in The Lord of the Rings, what's really cool about what Tolkien wrote for their culture is on their birthdays, they give presents, which I think is really cool. Like, so on his birthday, he gave away 120 presents because that was the birth, how many people he invited. So it's not like extravagant presents, but it's like little trinkets here and there. And I think that's just super cool to be that generous. Now, obviously, Bilbo was a very wealthy hobbit, so he could do that. But he was extremely generous with his wealth, which I think is really cool. And I wrote down Luke 6:38. Give and it will be given to you, a good measure. Hey, that's actually anyway. I forgot my own notes. So pray for me, people. So anyway, give and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Mm-hmm. So not only is it going to be given back to you, and that's not the way we should give, but it's going to be pressed down, shaken together. So it's going to be more, basically, is what that verse is saying. And I love that verse so much.
And it's funny to see how you did put Bilbo, because when he starts out, he didn't, of course, I know mainly the movies, and I've read the book for school and everything, but you look at the movies, like when Gandalf comes, he doesn't want him in his house. He doesn't want all these dwarves. They're eating all his food.
Yeah.
And then he realizes, I can make some good money later on. He finds the ring.
Well, it's not even that. Like, he doesn't go off seeking adventure. He goes off because he's late, and he doesn't think about it. So he just runs out the door. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to meet them. And so it's really cool in the story when you read it, because it's like he did that whole thing where he's like, confiscate these dwarves, I think is what he said. But like, even in the morning, something woke up in him, and he didn't even think. He just went out the door.
That's awesome.
And so that's another thing that's just cool about that story is with us, a lot of times we overthink stuff and we just need to get out the door. So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
There's a bumper sticker too.
Yeah.
You got anything?
No.
Cool. So we're going to take a quick break, I believe. This is a good break point.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you're listening to, please like and share this podcast with your friends and family. Check out our merch where we have t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and more. Continue this topic on our Facebook page with other kingdom-minded nerds. Now back to the show.
Hey guys, welcome back. Nerds in Christ podcast. Let's get into it. We're talking about the 7 deadly sins. We are on level 3, lust. This one's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I wrote down Tony Stark, and this is kind of like Iron Man 1 before
he becomes Iron Man.
Before he really becomes Iron, because I could write down a lot of different heroes or different things, but he just kind of stuck out because he really lived the life before he really turned his life around, which at the end of, Endgame or whatever with Thanos, like he was all about being selfless. But in the very first Iron Man, he's pretty selfish, pretty full of lust and full of himself and all that. And I wrote down Matthew 5:28. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And I've written, because I personally have struggled with this a lot. I've written a lot about this and studied a lot on it. And one thing I wrote on it was seeing without looking. And you guys know I used to work at a water park, right? Mm-hmm. So I would see lustful things all day long. And I really would and I know God put me there to solve that problem in me, because I was like, God, I need you. I would lean on him all the time. And so the whole seeing without looking, you can look at something, but turn. Mm-hmm. You can see something that you don't need to see and turn.
It's when you take the second or third glance.
But it's when that second glance comes in, when you actively lust, you're actively engaging in it and looking. And that's I wrote down David and Bathsheba, which we talked about earlier. It's David could have just been walking on the roof. Maybe he was playing his harp, singing praises, that sort of thing. He's very known to do that. And he could have saw Bathsheba and be like, okay, sorry about that, Lord. But he kept looking, kept watching. And then he calls his servants and he's like, hey,
who's that?
Who is that? And his servant was probably like, it's Bathsheba, wife of Uriah.
And another thing with that too is think of who she was related to. So
she was the daughter of
granddaughter
of someone,
of one of his what was it? Like,
advisors or something?
Yes, one of his advisors. Yeah.
Yeah. So he knew who that was, which is weird that he asked about her. Or maybe he knew of her, maybe didn't know her. But yeah, she was even a descendant of someone he knew very closely. So we have that temptation that always comes our way. Something can get in front of you, whether it be lust or really any kind of temptation. You could be walking towards a tree with a snake in it. And if the snake starts talking, you have that, you're seeing this thing and you could just turn away and go towards something else. But the state of like staying there and engaging in that. And I didn't write this down, but something I came across, I don't think I wrote it down. No, I didn't. It's easier to avoid sin than to combat it. So there's so many sins, like all these 7 that were listed, especially lust, that we can just flat out avoid.
Like Joseph.
Like Joseph, yeah. When Potiphar's wife was trying to assault him, like, "Hey, come here, big boy," he was just like, "Nah, girl," and he just left. Yep. Like that's we need to take that as a note of just really just don't even be on your phone. Nowadays you scroll anything and you're going to see something that you don't need to. And
what was the verse that you just read again too? It was in your heart.
Yeah. So Matthew 5:8, but I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
But what heart do you think it's talking about? Do you think it's the deeper meaning of the heart? Like how I was texting you, like Lavav? Yeah. Like the body, mind, and soul. And so it's more of an implication for later on down the road that we're just not seeing right now. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. It's good. Anything? Lust?
I mean, looking at it's a really double-edged sword, because in today's society, in today's world, not only are we combating lust, but there's a lot of stuff that goes along with lust. I mean, if you get on your web browser and you go to certain sites, you're not only leaning into the lustful nature of it, but you're also leading into the degradation, such as like human trafficking, like sex slaves, stuff like that. You're getting into a much broader topic, and that's stuff that's been around since the foundation. I mean, and it's something we don't look into nearly as much. It's like, oh, we see these pixels. It has nothing to do. They're getting paid well. I don't really care. I'm just trying to fulfill what I want to fulfill. But at the same time, you really have to just take a step back and it's like, whoa. I'm not only doing this because I'm selfish. I'm hurting my wife or my girlfriend or whoever you're with. And then you're also hurting, that's another man's daughter. That's another man's sister. And at the same time, it could be someone that's not there by their own choice.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because you look at like the biggest day in American television. It's usually the Super Bowl, right? That's also the number 1 day for human trafficking. And these are dark truths that we all have to live with, because, I mean, as men, lust is something, especially in the last, see, I'm 28, so ever since I've been little, and probably before that, it's like the men are always, oh, attaboy, you know, like go sow your wild oats. That's completely counterintuitive to what this teaches.
Yeah.
And it's not because we're men and we need to do that. It's wrong. It's not okay. Yeah. And we as a society have changed that it's not okay to it's okay. I mean, you can't watch television anymore. I mean, Game of Thrones, it could be a great show, but there's porn. I mean, straight up porn.
Yeah.
I mean, House of the Dragon. You watch any PG-13 television show.
Any commercial nowadays, too.
Well, you look at the old Hardee's commercials.
Yeah.
They used to have a burger and a lady dressed in nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, wait,
it's
what?
Like, this is a cheeseburger.
Yeah. But they sold more cheeseburgers than anybody because they used that sales tactic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what it is.
It's a huge evil machine that is very, very real. And that movie, Sound of Freedom, really, really hit the nail on the head with that. Just trying to get people more involved in that. We really, if you haven't seen Sound of Freedom, I highly implore you to watch it.
And I look at it, this skews us in other senses, because when we're more lustful towards sexual desires, we become more lustful towards material things.
Yeah, I
you
mean,
fall
lust
into the envy, the greed,
and
the pride,
Yeah,
the gluttony,
entitlement.
hmm
You fall into. I mean, lust is kind of the gateway to just all of them.
and it's all of them combined, I think, too.
Yeah, really. If you kind of get into it and look at it, that's true. Yeah, and and we talked about providing earlier, and I'm sure most of our listeners are guys. There might be a couple girls on here, but the pursuit of a woman is completely lost when you have lust involved.
Mm-hmm.
So the pursuit of we're wired to pursue and pine over and serenade the woman that we love. It should be our wives, obviously, but instead of that, we just can click 3 buttons, text or write down something, and we're there. And so you completely lose that pursuit of, if you read Song of Solomon, there's this deep pursuit kind of on both parties. And if you've never studied that, do it. And I always found it funny that the Hebrew culture, when they would go through Bible school, they weren't allowed to read that till they were like 13 or 14. Because if you really read it and get into it, it's super explicit, which I just think is funny that that's in our Bible. It talks about pomegranates and different things, and it's like, whoa, dude, whoa. But it just goes to show that God knows about that stuff. And I grew up in a church, in many churches, that don't have sex. That was it.
Not why.
Don't talk about it. Just don't do it. And that goes back to the law and love. It's like, no, but like, let's talk about the proper way to go about that instead of just like, don't have sex. It's evil. Sex is bad. No, God made sex. And I almost don't want to say this, but like the way he made having children, that's how you do that. And something really, really awesome happens when you guys do that. And that's how God made it.
Yeah.
Which is just like, praise God. Thank you, Lord. Like he could have made it to where you have to do taxes and you have to like do all these certain things. And it's like, no, he made it to where it's an enjoyment between two married people that love each other deeply.
And it's a form of worship together.
And it's a form of worship and praise and all this kind of stuff. Covenant to become one flesh. And we have so twisted that. And it's just like, it's so wrong.
And another thing to go with that too, science. In the science aspect, you look at, there is more problems with men our age because of the internet. And a cause of intimacy, a cause of sexual delusion, gender dysphoria, so on and so forth. And it's all because of this. And there's people who have something they shouldn't have at a young age because they can't do anything without something, in a way to put it. But it's like Paul even talks about it. He's like, hey, I'd rather none of you all be married. It'd be a lot easier. But if it's better to be married than to lust.
Yeah.
And it's so true, because all lust does is make you feel bad about yourself.
It feels good for 3 seconds.
Yeah. And then you're like, I'm worthless. I am hated. It's harder for you to forgive yourself after you lust than it is for the Lord to forgive you. Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. And last thing, we'll kind of leave lust in the fellas to kind of go cry in a corner. But if you struggle with that, and I have for a long time, the best thing you can do is like what Joseph did. He literally fled. So like if you were struggling with that, literally close the computer, put your phone, like literally do this. Don't like try to close your eyes and pray and you have your phone still in your hand. Close the computer, shut the phone off, go do 20 push-ups. Like, I don't care if you can't do, like push-ups or do something physical, because your mind cannot compute both. And that's what I have done for, I don't struggle with it anymore, but when I did, literally if you do something physically, your mind forgets about it.
Go chop wood.
Go do climb a tree. I don't know. Just do. So anyway, run from, what was Potiphar's wife? They say her name?
I think it just says Potiphar's wife.
So run away from Potiphar's wife. Yep. Literally leave your cloak or tunic, whatever it was, and just run. And I want to run.
Leave it behind. Yeah.
And I like how you put Captain America in here. I mean,
so yeah, the opposite of Tony Stark lust is Captain America. They have chastity, which that word is just I don't know. To me, it's just a strange word, but I just think of Captain America. I think lust and chastity, you could just kind of change with selfishness and selflessness, because, you know, being selfless, Captain America just shines to me because he is everything we try to be. He's like a Superman kind of character. Like we all strive to be that. And I wrote down, and this is the verse that goes with this is 1 Corinthians 6:18 through 20. Literally says, flee from sexual immorality. And like I said earlier, I don't think it's like praying, oh Lord, help me flee from. No, it's literally get on your feet and run. So anyway.
Well, Forrest Gump, start running.
Just start. Yeah, I mean.
Well, that's like, okay, at work in the business sense. Like when employees start doing nonsensical stuff and start arguing everything, other ones come up and they try prodding and poking and everything. I'm the opposite. I'm like,
I'm out.
Literally. Everybody will be up at the counter doing what they need to do. They'll start getting into it with something. I'll walk away.
Yeah.
They're like, you're never around here. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be.
Oh, I want nothing to do with it. Okay, so continuing. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a high price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. So if you're ever feeling the lust coming at you, read that. You'll probably forget about it. All right. You got anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say Samson. So
yes.
You look at Samson was actually pretty smart. You know, like he was always kind of
he had
coming
that
up with
riddle.
riddles.
Yeah.
Coming up with riddles, and then he did the thing with the fox tails, you know. I mean, so he knew what he was doing, but then you look at Delilah and how he fell with Delilah whenever he
was smarter.
Yeah.
He was smart, but she was smarter.
But the fact that he knew what he was doing and, you know, did it anyways, that was his ultimate demise. And he died at a younger age. And he was one of the judges. But then you think of, did he reach his full potential? Yeah. So he took that side quest and it ended up altering the whole trajectory of the game for him. Yeah. You know? So. Yeah.
And wasn't the first one he killed a lion or something? Isn't that kind of the first?
Yeah. The first like riddle. Yeah.
So that was like the first side quest that led him away from his main quest.
Yep.
Yeah, you got to be careful of the side quests. Sometimes you just need to leave them for after the end of the game.
Yep.
Sometimes you need to do them. So that just comes with wisdom. So who would be the opposite of Samson? Shamgar?
Possibly.
He only has one verse.
Right? Yeah.
He only gets one verse.
I guess Joseph, like we said earlier, would be the opposite.
Or Ruth.
And
Ruth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because she was technically considered a judge and a prophet, which is cool. Cool. Moving on to level 4 envy. So I wrote down Gollum.
I want to do the voice.
Do it.
No, I'll break the. I don't want to edit it
back. That was good.
That was good.
I've watched enough really Andy Serkis.
Yeah. So Gollum is just perfect because in the beginning, you know, the ring was in the water. And this kind of goes back to the first sin, really. He sees it. It's precious to him. He wants it. Especially if you read it in the books. It's literally, there's two people there. I feel like there could be a snake, but he sees it and he wants it. He desires it. And so his cousin finds it. And so he wants it. So he kills his cousin and takes it. So he's excommunicated from his family. And he uses the ring to steal. He wants more. So that whole envy thing. And has it for hundreds of years, hides in a cave. And then ever after losing the ring, he's envious of it and wants to get it back.
To the point where it splits him.
Yeah, he becomes two different personalities. One is, and it's cool because one of them still, there's a little bit of hope in it. Smeagol. And the more he's with the hobbits, the more that hope is kind of that flame is fanned.
He's able to fight off Gollum. He's able to no.
Yeah, and I want to dedicate a whole video podcast something to the Smeagol, Gollum, the ring, all that kind of stuff. I think that'd be really cool because we all struggle, I think, with our inner Gollum. So anyway, I wrote down the verse Exodus 27:17. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So I think what envy does is how I think of it, and that's one of the 10 commands. We talked about that earlier, the words, the 10 statements. I think of the prodigal son story. So he's envious of something he doesn't have, and him telling his dad, I want my inheritance, is basically saying, I wish you were dead. And I think that's what envy does. It's I wish you were dead so I could take your stuff. And that may be kind of harsh, but that's literally how I feel. Is like you see someone driving down the road in a truck. It's like, I want that truck. Well, yeah, I wish you were dead so I could have that truck. Because it's always the heart issue with the different commands and sin and that sort of thing. It's always goes down to your heart. And Smeagol, Gollum, was just ever after the ring. He just wished the hobbits were dead, basically. And he tried to kill him a couple of times.
Yeah, led him to the
Shelob, giant spider. Yep. But, he didn't think about Sam coming back and getting him. All right. And that's what I wrote down too for gratitude. The opposite of envy is gratitude. And obviously Sam, he is full of gratitude. And I think, obviously Sam is the hero of the story on a lot of different levels. And I wrote down Psalm 23:1. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. So envy, you want everything just because you do. Like you don't really need that, but you want it. And with gratitude, with the Psalm 23, I don't need anything. Like you're my shepherd. What more do I need? We talked about tithe earlier. It's exactly that. Like I don't need much.
And I think it really combats, you look at envy, I think that's one of the modern day, if you look at anxiety, I think that's underlying envy, 100%. Sure. The stuff I had in the Army, it was like, man, it's a long story, but in the end, it was more envy than anything. And we had a guest speaker not too long ago at our church, Bob Russell, and he had said something along the forms of he had a sick grandson, and he was praying, and he said, I really started one day with a prayer of thank you, Lord, and he just started listing everything he was thankful for. And then by the end, he's like, I almost couldn't have words to pray for this one more thing. But it's so true when we start praying and giving our gratitude to the Lord, like, thank you, Lord, for my wife, my child, the house that we live in, the food we have in our belly, so on and so forth. We change our mindset from, I want this, which that's not what prayer is about. And if you look at it, most prayers that we can put up, even as hard believers, like as level 9, level 10 believers, can be very envious. Like, Lord, give me the ability to make a business that succeeds, or give me money so I can get this, or let me get a better house, so on and so forth. And we treat God like a genie, where if we go the opposite, go the Sam way, it's like, Lord, thank you for what you have given me, and start listing it out from very top to the bottom, from where you were born to who you have in your life to the circumstances that put you where you're at now in your faith. You really change. And
I think he talks about attitude of gratitude.
And Troy talks about that all the time, our pastor.
Yeah, you can't be both anxious and grateful at the same time. And so many in the prayer that Jesus taught, the Lord's Prayer, starts, one of the first things you say is like, give us our daily bread, or our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Like you're starting with you, God, it's you. And you end very, very at the end, like, okay, give us our daily bread. And it's even plural. It's us, not like me. It's everybody.
It starts out to God and then to everybody.
Yeah. And something really special, I think, about Sam, coming back to Sam, is that he never loses himself to his surroundings. I think that's why I wrote down the gratitude towards him, because he's constantly talking about and thinking about going back home, and not so much the grandeur of going on this adventure and this quest and defeating this guy and that guy and doing all this thing. But, I'm listening to the audiobook of the Fellowship of the Ring. And I got to the point today where they're in Lothlorien and the Lady Galadriel. And hopefully I'm not losing a lot of people with this, because I'm going deep into this. But Galadriel gives everybody their gifts, right? So she gives Legolas a bow. She gives Aragorn a sheath for the sword Anduril. She gives Boromir a belt and the two younger hobbits a belt. And she gives Gimli lock of her hair, 3 locks of her hair, which that's a whole thing. But she gives Sam dirt. And they don't do this in the movie. Mm-hmm. And it's because the way she talks to him is like, when I was listening to it, I'm getting emotional about it now. She gives him dirt to bring back home because he knows he's going to get back home one day.
Well, that's like halfway through, he's counting the provisions for the
return journey.
And Frodo's like, there's not going to be a return journey.
He's like, oh, there might be.
And he's always looking out for Frodo, even when Frodo's not looking out for anything but the ring. When he starts to get that sickness, he's like, he carries him up the mountain.
Yeah.
Always checking on his master.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that. So he's constantly, Sam has what's best, or he has what's most important in his mind, in his eyes, in his heart of getting back home. Like, yes, this is important what I'm doing here. And I think what I'm trying to get to is we need to keep heaven in view. We need to keep a small box of soil that we can plant some seeds in here on earth so that when we get to heaven and keeping heaven on focus, I'm kind of losing it, but I'm trying to make this train of thought work. But keeping heaven focused and working here on the earth, no matter what quest we're doing or what situation we find ourselves in, constantly keeping which is heaven, in our mind. Sorry, that was a ramble. I tried to get home with that.
But it makes so much sense because you're not looking at the envious stuff. You're not looking at that business you want. You're not looking at that $1 million, that new car, that new house.
Because it doesn't, in the long run, it doesn't matter.
No. In Matthew, it talks about that. I mean, it talks about like the person who stores up their treasure here has their treasure. But when you store it up in heaven, that's when you receive it. And like in listening to all that, I just really feel that we need to read all of Psalm 23. It's a shorter psalm, but it's so true, and it combats 99% of these sins that we're going over.
Yeah.
Psalm 23, it starts out, "The Lord is my shepherd. I have what I need. He lets me lay down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He renews my life. He leads me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even when I go through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemy. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live."
Mm-hmm. That's it. I was trying to look up a song I was listening to earlier that would nail this home, but I can't remember the name of it. Bummer, lost it.
One thing I was going to say is A Shepherd's Psalm by Philip Keller. Have you guys ever read that?
I don't know.
It breaks down what it actually is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So when it's talking about anointing the head with oil, it's to anoint it so that to keep the bugs away.
Oh,
and when
cool.
it's talking about the greener pastures, it's because we always think the grass is greener on the other side, and sheep will just aimlessly wander, and they might eat the bad grass instead of the good ones, but the sheep that listen always stay close to the shepherd, and they can always, correct it with the staff. And it talks about how with the still waters and fresh waters, it's talking about that because if they were in a pond, then they might get nematodes and diseases instead. So it's like, there's a whole book about it, but it breaks down exactly what it's talking about.
I'm going to have to look that up.
That's awesome.
So it's a book or a song?
Yeah. It's called A Shepherd's Psalm by Philip Keller.
I'm going to have to get that. Yeah, I've heard of him before.
And something with that and everything we're talking about in envy, it really made me think a lot of times when we wish or we start envying someone else, we don't realize what they're going through. We don't understand the masks they've had to put on.
We're seeing the highlight reel, not their day-to-day.
And something that gets me is a song that kind of goes with envy in a way that he doesn't understand why it happened. It's by a newer artist, Josiah Queen. It's called I Am Barabbas. And the chorus, brings me to tears every time I hear it because it's so true. Because when I get envious, this is what I think about because of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It says, in the chorus, it says, "I am Barabbas. You took upon my cross. I was a prisoner till you bought my bond with blood. I can't run away from what my accusers say. I am Barabbas, your friend. They made me sit right there as I watched them beat the preacher man. 39 of all those lashes should have been on my own skin. How can it be? How can it be?
That's good. I say we end on that. So this is going to be a two-parter because it's kind of running long, which is fine. So we're going to wrap it up here and pick back up on, what were we on, level 5?
Mm-hmm.
We'll pick back up on level 5, gluttony. So this is the Nerds in Christ podcast. I'm Mike, your homeschool theologian. We have Cameron.
Bible man Cam.
We have Tyler. He'll be here next time too.
Yeah.
So you can support this ministry. We have a way that you can give online. We have our devotional out. I don't have it, or I would show it, but we do have it. I've got merch that you can get. This is one of my favorite t-shirts that I've written a couple of other books. If you are listening to us, you can check us out on YouTube. If you're watching us, you can listen to us on podcasting. We also have a Facebook page that you can come and kind of talk about this topic and other topics that we have. But anyway, you guys got any closing remarks for this episode?
I think one of my notes that I had was I wrote Gollum as well, but I also wrote Smeagol and Deagle, comparing them to Cain and Abel, like me and you talked about.
That's a good one.
And then one thing that stuck out was what I sent you the other day. So Achan.
Remind me.
Achan, it's in Joshua. And he talks about when Joshua goes to defeat Ai, which is a small town, and he's only going to send a small amount of people because he doesn't feel like he needs to send the whole army.
Yeah.
But in the chapter before, then Achan committed the sin, and he went and he dug up all the treasures, kind of like in secret, kind of like how the ring is the secret sin. He took the secret sin and he buried it. But that one man's lust or envy for that gold and the treasure ended up costing the entire camp, the entire army. So
don't be envious.
Yep.
That's good. All right. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
Good night. God bless.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nerds in Christ podcast. Our goal is always to give glory and honor to God in all things and share the love and light of Christ everywhere.